I was born with nothing, not even a pair of decent shoes. I clawed my way out of poverty, built an empire with my own two hands, and gave my family everything I never had. But in the end, the very people I loved most betrayed me. My wife walked away. My son turned his back on me, and I was left broken, staring at the ruins of everything I built. But life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Years later, when the world broke my son the same way it once broke me, he came back, and I had to decide, hold on to the bitterness or forgive. This is my story. My name is Michael Coleman. Today, when people hear my name, they immediately think of a successful businessman, a famous brand, and a life of luxury. But the truth is, my childhood in a small town in Ohio was nothing but shadows of hunger and poverty. Our house was nothing more than a broken-down wooden shack that could barely keep us warm in the winter or safe in the summer. My father worked long hours at a factory, but his wages were so little that many nights we went to bed with empty stomachs. My mother stitched clothes for neighbors to earn a few extra dollars, but the chains of poverty were too heavy to break. I never had new shoes for school. Most of the time, I stuffed pieces of cardboard into the holes of my worn-out pair just to keep my feet from touching the ground. Other kids laughed at me, calling me Poor Mike. Their jokes burned inside me, but that very fire gave me a vision. One day, I would have everything I never had. When I was 12, my father fell seriously ill. The factory let him go because he could no longer operate the heavy machines. Suddenly, the entire weight of the household fell on my mother. That was the moment I made a decision. I had to work. I started selling newspapers in the morning, shoveling snow in the winter, and sometimes washing dishes in small diners just to earn a few dollars. I was exhausted every night, but as I lay in bed, I whispered to myself, "Michael, this poverty is temporary. You won't be stuck here forever." During those years, I began noticing little things about business. Selling newspapers taught me that if I paired the papers with small candies or chocolates, people would buy more. I started experimenting, and for the first time, I realized maybe I had the instincts of a businessman. Still, life never missed a chance to test me. Once, I saved enough to buy my younger brother a new pair of shoes. But the very next day, some local bully stole them. That night, I cried silently, feeling the weight of helplessness, but also a stronger determination. It was as if the universe kept asking me, will you give up, or will you fight harder? Poverty didn't break me, it forged me. It became my greatest teacher, building a fire inside me that refused to die out. I promised myself that one day, I would create my own brand, and it would grow so big that people would never again associate my name with hunger or despair, but with resilience and success. By the time I turned 15, my life was a cycle of work, exhaustion, and silent dreams. School became secondary, not because I didn't value education, but because survival demanded more from me than textbooks ever could. I would wake up before dawn to deliver newspapers, rush to school half asleep, and then head straight to odd jobs afterward. While my classmates talked about baseball games or weekend movies, I was counting every dime in my pocket, wondering if it would be enough to buy bread and milk for my family. Deep inside, I carried no bitterness toward them. Instead, I carried a burning hunger, not just for food, but for a future where money would no longer control us. One winter, I started shoveling snow outside a row of small shops. The owners paid me little, but I noticed something. Most of them owned their stores, while I was just the boy cleaning their doorsteps. I began asking questions. How did they start? What did it take? What mistakes had they made? Some ignored me, others laughed, but a few gave me advice. One old shopkeeper told me, "Son, business isn't about money, it's about solving problems. Solve people's problems, and the money will come." Those words stuck in my head like a seed waiting for water. At 16, I saved enough to buy a small cart and began selling sodas and snacks outside a construction site. The workers were always thirsty and hungry, and I saw an opportunity. Every morning, I loaded the cart, wheeled it down the street, and waited for the lunch break whistle. Business was good, better than I had expected. For the first time, I was making more than just survival money. But success attracted jealousy. A group of older boys began harassing me, demanding free snacks. When I refused, one of them overturned my cart, spilling everything onto the dirt. I watched my small dream lying crushed in the mud. I wanted to fight, to scream, but I stood silently. The workers, however, noticed what happened. The next day, they pulled money together and helped me restock. One of them told me, "Kid, you've got heart. Don't let anyone kill that." That moment changed me. I realized that people respected effort, honesty, and persistence. I rebuilt my cart business, this time stronger. I made deals with a local bakery for cheaper bread and found a wholesaler who sold me sodas at a discount. My profit grew. For the first time in my life, I didn't just help put food on the family table. I added something extra. My mom cried the day I brought home groceries and new blankets for winter. I wasn't rich, not even close, but I felt rich in spirit. Poverty was still there, pressing on my shoulders. But now I could see cracks of light breaking through. I knew one thing for certain: I would never stop. I was no longer just surviving, I was building. By the time I turned 18, I had more scars on my hands than most men twice my age. Years of odd jobs had toughened me, but they had also taught me discipline. I had learned how to stretch a dollar, how to negotiate, and, most importantly, how to never quit, no matter how heavy the burden became. High school graduation should have been a celebration, but for me it was just another reminder of what I lacked. My classmates were heading to college, some with scholarships, others backed by wealthy parents. I, on the other hand, knew college was a distant dream. There was no money, no safety net, no plan B. I had to make my own way. I took a job at a local hardware store. The pay was low, but I was fascinated by how the owner ran his business, how he managed inventory, dealt with customers, and kept the books balanced. I watched, I listened, I learned. After a year, I asked him for a small loan to start my own venture. He laughed in my face, saying, "Kid, dreams don't pay bills. Work here, save your money, and stop thinking so big." But I refused to let his words crush me. Instead, I started saving every penny. I cut out small luxuries: no sodas, no movie nights, no new clothes. Slowly, painfully, I scraped together $1,000. It wasn't much, but to me, it was everything. With that money, I bought second-hand equipment and started a small screen printing business in my mother's garage. My idea was simple: custom t-shirts for local events, sports teams, and small businesses. At first, orders trickled in, mostly friends, neighbors, and the local school. But soon, word spread. People liked the quality and the fact that I delivered on time, every time. Of course, it wasn't easy. The machine broke down more than once. And sometimes, I had to stay up all night fixing it with nothing but duct tape and determination. There were weeks when I barely broke even. But then came the breakthrough, an order from a mid-sized company that needed uniforms for its staff. That deal doubled my income in a single month. I began to see the power of branding. People weren't just buying shirts. They were buying identity, pride, and recognition. That realization planted the seed of something much bigger in my heart. One day, I wouldn't just sell t-shirts, I would build a brand. Still, I was young, inexperienced, and alone. There were nights I questioned myself, nights when exhaustion made me want to quit. But every time I thought of quitting, I remembered the empty stomachs of my childhood, the laughter of those kids who mocked me, and the promise I had made to myself years ago. Failure wasn't an option. I was going to climb, no matter how high the mountain. At 19, I thought I was unstoppable. My small screen printing venture had grown steadily, and I felt ready to expand. But youth has a dangerous companion: overconfidence. A friend from high school, Darren, approached me with an idea. He said we should partner up and open a storefront in town. "Think about it, Mike," he told me. "A real shop, customers walking in every day. No more hustling from your mom's garage. We could be the next big thing." I was hesitant. I didn't have the money for rent, utilities, or equipment upgrades. But Darren promised he'd handle the finances if I handled the operations. It sounded fair, and more than that, it sounded like the chance I had been waiting for. So, I said yes. At first, things looked good. The storefront gave us visibility. Orders increased, and I worked harder than ever, 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. But Darren wasn't the partner I thought he was. He handled the books, and I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. One evening, a supplier called me, angry that our payment was 3 weeks late. I was shocked. Darren had assured me everything was fine. When I confronted him, he brushed it off with a smile. "Relax, Mike. Business has ups and downs. I'll handle it." But he didn't handle it. Within months, bills piled up. Customers complained about late deliveries because Darren was pocketing money that should have gone to supplies. By the time I realized the full scope of the mess, it was too late. He had drained most of the funds and disappeared. The landlord kicked us out. The sign above the shop was ripped down. Just like that, my first real attempt at building something big had collapsed. I remember walking home that night with my hands shoved deep in my pockets, the winter wind cutting through my jacket. I felt like the world was laughing at me. My mom tried to comfort me, saying, "Michael, sometimes people's betrayal is the price of wisdom." But at 19, wisdom felt like a poor consolation for a broken dream. Yet, in the silence of those dark nights, I realized something crucial. I had lost money. I had lost a partner, but I hadn't lost my vision. Betrayal had burned me, but it had also taught me the value of trust, contracts, and accountability. I went back to basics. I rebuilt my garage shop, this time smarter. I kept every receipt, tracked every penny, and trusted no one blindly again. It was a slow crawl, but my small business started breathing again. Failure didn't kill me, it sharpened me. Betrayal didn't end me, it prepared me. And though I didn't know it at the time, those lessons would become the foundation for the empire I would later build. After Darren's betrayal, I could have walked away from business forever. Many nights, I thought about it, just getting a steady job, a paycheck, a safe and simple life. But something inside me refused to die. I wasn't born just to survive. I was born to build. Back in my mother's garage, I rebuilt my small screen printing business from scratch. Every shirt I printed, every order I delivered, carried the weight of my determination. Slowly, word spread again. Michael Coleman delivers quality, no matter what. One summer afternoon, I was approached by a local high school coach. He wanted custom uniforms for his basketball team. It wasn't a huge order, but I poured everything into it. Better designs, better fabric, and personal attention to every detail. When the team showed up at their first game wearing those uniforms, the entire gym noticed. Suddenly, I wasn't just the kid printing shirts in his garage. I was becoming the go-to guy for quality work. That job led to more schools, then small companies, then local events. I worked tirelessly, often collapsing into bed with ink-stained hands. But each new order was another step up the ladder. The real breakthrough came when a regional construction company reached out. They needed branded uniforms for over 200 workers. For me, it was the biggest order I had ever seen. My heart raced as I did the math. The profit from this contract could change everything. But fear whispered in my ear, "What if you fail? What if the order is too big?" I ignored the fear. I said yes. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life. I worked almost around the clock, sleeping on a cot in the garage between shifts. My mom brought me food, sometimes reminding me to breathe. I hired 2 neighborhood kids to help me with packaging. We spilled ink, we broke machines, we argued, but we kept going. The day I delivered those uniforms, the construction company's manager shook my hand and said, "Kid, you did good. Real good." He paid me in full. And when I opened that envelope, I couldn't believe my eyes. For the first time, I had more money than I knew what to do with. I didn't buy a car, or new clothes, or flashy toys. Instead, I reinvested. I bought better equipment, rented a small warehouse, and rebranded my shop as Coleman Prints. The name meant something to me. It wasn't just about printing shirts anymore. It was about printing my mark on the world. That contract didn't just change my bank account, it changed my identity. People no longer saw me as poor Mike. They saw me as Michael Coleman, a young man with grit, vision, and the beginnings of something real. I felt unstoppable again. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. By the time I turned 23, Coleman Prince was no longer just a garage hustle. It had grown into a recognizable name in our region. Schools, local businesses, construction, companies, even small-town festivals were coming to me for their printing needs. I had hired a small team, 3 designers, 2 machine operators, and 1 delivery driver. Walking into my rented warehouse every morning felt surreal. The sound of machines buzzing, the smell of fresh ink, the chatter of workers, it was proof that I was building something real. Money was finally flowing, but with it came new challenges. Payroll, taxes, and deadlines weighed on me constantly. I worked 12 to 14 hours a day, rarely taking a break. Success was sweet, but it came with a bitter aftertaste. I was slowly drifting away from my family. Around this time, I married Emily, a bright and ambitious woman I met at a local business conference. She admired my drive and often said I inspired her. In the beginning, we were partners in every sense. She helped me organize finances, encouraged me during tough times, and believed in my dream. But as the business grew, so did the distance between us. I was always at the warehouse, always on the phone, always chasing the next big deal. Emily wanted dinners together, weekend trips, moments of peace. I wanted growth, expansion, more contracts. "Mike," she said one night, "you're building a future, but you're forgetting the present." Her words stung, but I brushed them aside. I told myself, this is temporary. Once the business stabilizes, I'll have time for her, for us. But that time never came. The company landed a massive deal with a sports merchandise distributor. And suddenly, Coleman Prince was producing thousands of units a month. My face appeared in a local business magazine under the headline, "From Poverty to Printing. Powerhouse." It felt like validation of every sleepless night, every sacrifice. But Emily's eyes told a different story. She smiled for the cameras, stood beside me at award dinners. But at home, she was distant. Sometimes, I'd find her sitting silently in the living room, staring at the walls. One evening, after I came home past midnight, she asked quietly, "Do you even see me anymore?" I froze. I didn't have an answer. In my pursuit of success, I had overlooked the very person who had once held my hand through the struggle. Still, I kept pushing forward. Expansion meant survival. Competition was growing, and I couldn't afford to slow down. At that stage in life, I didn't realize something vital. Success in business means little if the foundation of your personal life begins to crack. And though I couldn't see it yet, those cracks would one day widen into a storm that would nearly destroy me. By my late 20s, Coleman Prince had grown beyond my wildest dreams. What started in my mother's garage was now a brand recognized across several states. Our products weren't just in local schools and businesses anymore. They were in major retail stores, sports arenas, and corporate offices. The contract with the sports merchandise distributor had opened doors I never imagined possible. Soon, I was negotiating with bigger companies, attending national expos, and shaking hands with executives who once would have ignored a small town kid like me. I upgraded from the rented warehouse to a full-scale production facility. Rows of modern machines lined the floor, pumping out thousands of products each day. I hired dozens of employees. When I walked through the factory, workers nodded respectfully, calling me Mr. Coleman. It was strange hearing that title, but it filled me with pride. Financially, I was finally free. I bought my mother a beautiful house and told her she would never have to work another day in her life. Watching her cry tears of joy was one of the proudest moments of my journey. But with every success, something in my personal life seemed to slip further away. Emily and I had a son by then, Jacob. He was bright, curious, and full of life. But I was hardly there to see him grow up. I missed his first words, his first steps, even his first day of school. Emily tried to make me see the truth. "Mike," she said one night as I packed for another business trip, "he doesn't know you. He calls you Dad, but you're a stranger in his world." Her voice trembled, but I brushed it aside, promising her I'd make up for it later. But later never seemed to come. National recognition demanded more from me. I was constantly flying to meetings, striking deals, and planning expansions. I told myself I was doing it all for my family, for Jacob's future, for Emily's comfort, for the life we had once only dreamed of. But I was blind to the fact that in giving them everything, I was giving them nothing of myself. The cracks widened. Emily stopped attending my events. At home, conversations grew shorter, colder. Sometimes, we'd sit across the dinner table in silence, the only sound Jacob's laughter echoing from another room. I told myself things would get better once. I reached the next level, once. I secured one more deal, one more milestone. But success has a way of feeding itself, demanding more and more until you're consumed by it. And while my name was rising on the national stage, my family life was quietly unraveling. What I didn't realize then was that success without presence comes at a devastating cost. And one day soon, I would be forced to face the price of neglect. Success can blind a man. It blinded me. While I was busy signing contracts and shaking hands, I failed to notice the silence that had taken over my home. Emily had grown colder, her smiles mechanical, her words brief. At first, I thought it was just the stress of raising Jacob while I was away. But deep inside, a quiet unease began gnawing at me. Nights became longer. When I came home late, she was often already asleep, or pretending to be. Jacob, once cheerful around me, now seemed distant. He preferred spending time with his friends, rolling his eyes whenever I tried to connect. "You're never here, Dad," he snapped once when I asked about his day. The words cut deep, but I didn't know how to answer. Business, meanwhile, was booming. Coleman Prince had landed a national chain as a client. It was the kind of deal I had dreamed about for years. But instead of celebrating, I felt a hollowness inside me. What good was all this? Success if my family slipped further, away with every passing day. Then came the first sign that something was truly wrong. I noticed Emily whispering on the phone late at night. Her voice hushed, her face hidden. At first, I brushed it off. But the unease grew. One afternoon, while returning early from the office, I found her quickly ending a call, her expression guilty. When I asked who it was, she said, "Just a friend." A friend. Doubt sank its claws into me. I began to notice the little things. The way she dressed more carefully when she went out. The sudden absences with vague explanations. The coldness in her eyes when she looked at me. Jacob, too, had changed. At 16, he carried himself with defiance. He questioned everything I said, often siding with his mother. "You don't understand us," he once yelled. And maybe he was right. I had built an empire, but I had failed to build a bond with my own son. The truth came crashing down one evening when a business associate, who had seen Emily at a restaurant with another man, pulled me aside. "Mike, I'm not one to interfere, but you should know what's going on." My world tilted. At first, I refused to believe it. Emily, the woman who had once believed in me when no one else did, the mother of my child, betraying me? It seemed impossible. But the evidence piled up, missed calls, unexplained outings, and finally, a message I accidentally saw on her phone. Words of affection not meant for me. I confronted her. Her silence was louder than any confession. She didn't deny it. She only said, coldly, "You were never here, Mike. Someone else was." The betrayal struck deeper than any wound poverty had ever given me. Business could be rebuilt, money could be regained, but trust, once shattered, left a man hollow. I thought I had known pain in my childhood. I was wrong. The real pain came from losing the very people I thought I was working so hard for. The night Emily admitted her betrayal, something inside me cracked. For years, I had fought poverty, hunger, and failure. But nothing compared to that moment, the moment I realized I had lost my family. Within weeks, Emily packed her things. She didn't scream or argue. She simply left, her silence colder than any storm. Jacob went with her. He didn't even look back at me as they walked out the door. "Dad, you don't get it," he said flatly. "You were never really here." His words echoed in the empty house long after they were gone. I stood in the living room surrounded by the fruits of my labor, the leather furniture, the polished floors, the expensive art on the walls, and yet, I had never felt poorer in my life. On paper, I was a success story, Coleman Prince was thriving. My face was still on magazine covers, and investors wanted in. But at home, the silence was unbearable. No laughter, no warmth, no family. I buried myself in work, thinking maybe the noise of machines and meetings could drown out the emptiness. But late at night, when the world was quiet, the truth roared inside me. I had built an empire and lost the very people it was meant for. Emily filed for divorce. The process was brutal. Lawyers, paperwork, endless arguments about property and custody. In the end, she walked away with more than half of what I had built. Jacob chose to stay with her. I was left with the company, but not much else. Friends, who once crowded around me for favors, suddenly grew scarce. They shook their heads in pity, whispered behind my back, and treated me like a fallen king. But what hurt most wasn't the gossip or the financial loss. It was the emptiness at family dinners that no longer existed. The birthdays I spent alone. The milestones of my son's life that I was no longer part of. One night, sitting in my office with a glass of whiskey, I stared at the company logo on the wall, Coleman Prince. I had dreamed of making my name powerful, untouchable. But in that moment, it felt like a cruel joke. What good was a brand if the people behind the name had abandoned me? The betrayal had taken more than money. It had taken meaning. For the first time since my childhood, I felt like the poor boy from Ohio again. Not because of hunger or ragged shoes, but because I had nothing that truly mattered. I thought I had hit rock bottom as a child. But standing there, surrounded by wealth and emptiness, I realized rock bottom isn't about what you don't have, it's about losing what you can never buy back. And that night, for the first time in years, I wept like a child. After Emily and Jacob left, life became a blur. Days turned into nights, and nights into empty mornings. I went through the motions, meetings, deals, factory visits, but nothing felt real. Success tasted like ash in my mouth. Whiskey became my companion. I told myself it was just to help me sleep, but soon I was drinking to forget, to numb the silence that echoed in my mansion-sized home. The same man who once promised himself never to be broken was now crumbling behind closed doors. Coleman Prince kept running, but my heart wasn't in it. I signed papers without reading them, approved projects without care. Some employees noticed. Whispers of Mr. Coleman isn't himself spread through the factory floor. One afternoon, my mother, now living comfortably in the house I had bought her, came to see me. She walked into my office, her sharp eyes scanning the empty bottles on my desk. "Michael," she said softly, "you're drowning." I laughed bitterly. What else is left for me to do, Mom? I lost my family. I lost my son. Everything I worked for means nothing now. She sat across from me, her voice firm. "You didn't lose everything. You're still alive. That means you can still change. But you have to stop running from your pain and start facing it." Her words cut through me. I hated hearing them, but I knew she was right. I had spent years building walls of steel around my heart. But when betrayal broke those walls, I had nothing left inside to hold me up. The real turning point came one rainy night. I was driving back from the office, half drunk. My mind clouded with anger and regret. The car swerved, and for a terrifying moment, I almost lost control. I pulled over, heart pounding, staring at my trembling hands on the wheel. That could have been the end of me. And in that moment, I realized I didn't want my story to end like this. Not as a broken man, not as a cautionary tale. The next morning, I poured every bottle in the house down the sink. I called my lawyer, cancelled the unnecessary meetings, and took a step I should have taken long ago. I went to therapy. At first, it was uncomfortable. Sitting in a room, admitting my flaws, my failures, my loneliness, it felt like weakness. But week by week, the burden grew lighter. I began to see that my worth wasn't tied to my company, my money, or even the approval of others. My worth was in how I lived, how I loved, and how I chose to move forward. I couldn't undo Emily's betrayal. I couldn't erase the years I missed with Jacob. But I could change the man I was becoming. And that realization was the first true victory I had in a long time. Years passed, and life slowly settled into a rhythm. Therapy helped me find peace, though loneliness still lingered. Coleman Prince remained strong. but I no longer lived for quarterly profits or industry awards. I spent more time giving back, donating to schools, mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself at their age. Yet, despite these changes, one wound never fully healed: Jacob. I often wondered where he was, what kind of man he had become. Did he hate me? Did he blame me for the broken family? I had no answers. Then one evening, as autumn leaves swirled across my driveway, there was a knock on my door. I opened it, and there he stood, Jacob. Older now. In his late 20s, his face carried lines of stress far beyond his years. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My heart raced. The last time I saw him, his eyes were filled with resentment. Now, they held something different: exhaustion, maybe even regret. "Dad," he finally said, his voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside without a word, motioning him in. He dropped his bag by the door and sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair. "I messed up," he admitted. "The business I started with Mom, it's gone. Investors pulled out. Debts piled up. And she left. She said she couldn't handle it anymore." I listened quietly, my heart breaking. The same betrayal I had endured was now his reality. "I thought I had it all figured out," he continued, tears welling in his eyes. "I thought you were just some old man obsessed with work, and I wanted to do things differently. But I failed, Dad. I lost everything, and I don't know what to do." For years, I had rehearsed what I might say if he ever returned. Anger, lectures, maybe even rejection. But sitting there, looking at my broken son, all of that melted away. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Jacob, listen to me. You are my son. Nothing you've done, nothing you've lost, can change that. If you're here, then you still have a chance to rebuild, just like I once did." He broke down, sobbing, and for the first time since he was a boy, he leaned into me, letting me hold him. It wasn't forgiveness in words, it was forgiveness in presence. The kind of moment where years of distance collapsed into a single heartbeat of connection. That night, as we talked until dawn, I realized something. Maybe life had to break him the same way it broke me for him to understand. And maybe, just maybe, this was our chance to start again, not as business partners, not as rivals, but as father and son. The morning after Jacob's return, the house felt different, alive in a way it hadn't in years. For so long, silence had been my only company. But now there was the sound of footsteps, the smell of coffee brewing, and the quiet presence of my son across the table. Jacob looked tired, worn down by failure, but there was still fire in his eyes. The same fire I once carried when I was clawing my way out of poverty. "Dad," he said softly, "I don't even know where to start. I feel like I've ruined everything." I sipped my coffee, studying him. "You start the same way I did, by accepting that failure isn't the end. It's the beginning. What matters now isn't what you lost, but what you do next." Over the following weeks, I began guiding him. Not as a boss, not as a strict parent, but as a mentor. I showed him the old ledgers from the early days of Coleman Prince, explained the mistakes I had made, the risks that almost destroyed me, and the resilience that carried me through. He listened, truly listened, in a way he never had before. Sometimes he argued, sometimes he doubted, but he always came back with questions, eager to learn. One evening, we visited the factory together. Employees watched in surprise as I introduced Jacob, not as my successor, but as someone who wanted to earn his place. For the first time, I saw him humbled, greeting workers, asking about their lives, seeing the people behind the machines. "This," I told him quietly, "is the heart of any business. Not the money, not the awards. These people. Treat them right, and you'll never fail completely." He nodded, and I knew he understood. At night, we had long conversations about trust, about betrayal, about the pain we both carried. I admitted my faults, the times I chose the company over him, the nights I wasn't there. He admitted his arrogance, his blindness to what I had built, and how he had been swayed by promises of quick success. Slowly, forgiveness seeped into those conversations. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like bricks being laid for a stronger foundation. One weekend, I took him to the old neighborhood in Ohio where I grew up. The broken houses, the cracked sidewalks, the memories of hunger. I showed him the spot where I once shined shoes for coins, the diner where I washed dishes, the library that gave me hope. This, I said, pointing at the worn streets, is where your story begins too. Never forget it. Because the moment you forget where you came from, you're already lost. Jacob's eyes glistened. Dad, I'm sorry for everything. I thought I was stronger than you, smarter than you. But I see now, I was blind. I don't just want to be your son. I want to learn how to be the kind of man you are. For the first time in decades, my heart felt whole. Jacob threw himself into learning with an intensity one hadn't seen in him before. He arrived early to meetings, stayed late in the factory, and asked questions about every decision I made. For the first time, I saw not just my son, but a man determined to rebuild. But rebuilding isn't easy. The world of business had changed since my early days. Markets moved faster, competition was sharper, and social media could make or break a brand overnight. Jacob was eager, but he also carried the impatience of youth. One evening, as we sat in my office surrounded by stacks of files, he slammed his pen down. Dad, this is too slow. If we are going to expand, we need to take risks. Big risks. Social media campaigns, aggressive marketing, partnerships with influencers. That's how things work now. I leaned back, studying him. Son, growth without roots is just weeds. Fast, flashy, but it doesn't last. If you want to build something real, it takes time. He groaned in frustration. That's your problem. You move too carefully. Maybe that's why Mom left. You were so busy guarding the past, you couldn't see the future. The words stung, but I didn't respond in anger. I saw myself in him, in the way he wanted everything now, in the way he thought boldness could replace patience. Jacob, I said firmly, I've been where you are. I wanted to conquer the world overnight. But the truth is, shortcuts cost more in the long run. If you want to lead, you have to balance vision with wisdom. He didn't reply, just stared at the floor, jaw clenched. The tension between us lingered for days. Then came the test. A powerful investor approached Jacob directly, offering him a deal that promised quick expansion but required giving up majority control of our company's new division. Jacob was tempted. It was everything he thought he wanted: money, speed, visibility. He brought the proposal to me. Dad, this is it. This is how we take Coleman Prince global. I scanned the papers, my heart heavy. It was the same trap I had seen 100 times. Shiny promises hiding chains of control. Jacob, I said quietly, if you sign this, the company won't be yours. You'll just be a puppet. I won't stop you, but you need to decide what kind of legacy you want. 4 hours, he wrestled with the decision. I stayed silent, letting him fight his own battle. Finally, near midnight, he tore the contract in half. You're right, he whispered, exhaustion in his eyes. I almost sold everything for speed. I almost made the same mistake twice. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Mistakes aren't the end, son. They are lessons. And tonight, you just passed one of the hardest. It wasn't just a victory for him. It was a moment of trust rebuilt between us. For the first time, Jacob chose patience over pride, and in that choice, he grew closer to the man he was meant to be. After the investor incident, something shifted between Jacob and me. For the first time, I didn't see him as the reckless boy chasing shortcuts. I saw him as a man, scarred by mistakes, humbled by failure, but willing to grow. From then on, we worked side by side. Mornings began with coffee and strategy sessions, afternoons with factory walks, evenings with long talks about where the company could go next. Jacob brought fresh ideas, digital campaigns, sustainability programs, partnerships with young designers. I brought perspective, reminders to protect workers, to stay rooted in quality, to never trade values for profit. Together, we found balance. One day, during a tour of the factory, Jacob stopped to speak with an older worker named Carl, who had been with us since the early days. Mr. Coleman Jr., Carl said with a smile. I remember when your dad used to stay here until midnight, fixing machines himself. You've got big shoes to fill. Jacob laughed nervously. I know, Carl. I'm just hoping I don't trip over them. I watched the exchange quietly, pride swelling in me. My son wasn't just learning to lead, he was earning respect. At home, things began to heal too. Dinners no longer felt awkward. We laughed more, shared stories, even argued without bitterness. The weight of betrayal and years apart was still there, but it no longer defined us. One evening, Jacob looked at me across the table. Dad, I used to think your legacy was just Coleman prints. The buildings, the brand, the money. But now I see, it's more than that. It's the people you lifted, the values you held. That's the real legacy. His words hit me deeper than any award or recognition I had ever received. Not long after, we faced a major opportunity. A competitor offered a merger, promising enormous growth. Years ago, I would have leapt at the chance without hesitation. But this time, I stepped back and let Jacob lead the negotiations. He prepared for weeks, studying contracts, listening to advisors, asking me questions late into the night. And when the day came, he sat at that long boardroom table with confidence I had never seen in him before. The deal he crafted wasn't about greed or ego. It protected our workers, honored our values, and positioned the company for steady, sustainable growth. When the papers were signed, the investors applauded, not just me, but him. Afterward, Jacob turned to me. Dad, I couldn't have done this without you. I shook my head. No, son. You couldn't have done it without yourself. I only showed you the path, you walked it. In that moment, I realized something I had been chasing my whole life. Legacy isn't about what you build with your hands, it's about what you build in the hearts of those who come after you. And standing there beside my son, I knew my legacy was safe. Years slipped by, but this time, they didn't vanish in regret. They carried purpose. With Jacob beside me, Coleman Prints entered a new chapter, one I never could have written alone. Our brand became more than a business. We opened scholarship funds for kids from poor neighborhoods, the kind I grew up in. We started a program to give ex-convicts a second chance at honest work. We partnered with eco-friendly suppliers to make sure our success didn't harm the world. We'd leave behind. Jacob pushed us into the digital age, while I anchored us in tradition. He was the vision of tomorrow, and I was the memory of yesterday. Together, we made the present strong. But what meant more to me than any contract or expansion was the bond we rebuilt. Jacob visited me not just for business, but for dinners, for conversations about life, for moments where he simply said, Dad, I'm glad I'm here. One Sunday afternoon, we sat on the porch of my farmhouse in Pennsylvania, the same porch where I had once sat alone, drowning in betrayal. This time, there was laughter, warmth, and a sense of peace I had never known before. Dad, Jacob said, looking out at the fields, do you ever think about how far you've come? From shining shoes in Ohio to all of this. I smiled faintly. Every day. But you know what? The real journey wasn't from poverty to wealth. It was from pain to forgiveness. That's the road that mattered most. He nodded, thoughtful. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Now I see it's the opposite. It's being able to forgive, to keep going even after being broken. Hearing him say that, I felt something settle inside me. For years, I had carried wounds, of hunger, of betrayal, of abandonment. But sitting there beside my son, I knew those wounds had finally turned into scars. Marks of survival, not pain. In time, Jacob took more responsibility in the company. Employees looked to him not just as the boss's son, but as a leader in his own right. I stepped back, not because I was tired, but because I trusted him. Truly trusted him. One evening, after a long day, I walked through the factory one last time. The machines hummed, workers waved, and the air smelled of ink and fresh paper. I placed my hand on the railing, closed my eyes, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the boy I once was, for the man I became, and for the son who carried the torch forward. When I returned home, Jacob was waiting, ready to rest. Dad? He asked with a smile. I nodded. Yes, son. Because now I know the legacy is in safe hands. For the first time in my life, I felt free.